I have got top coach with me, Palena Neale. Welcome. Hello, Palena.
Hello. Greetings from Paris.
Yeah, we've got Palena Neale, who is a top leadership coach who works with everyone from NGOs to the UN. Who's going to be talking to us today about everyday leadership in troubled times. So, Palena, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's a great subject to be covering, because I think there's many leaders out there, whether you're leading a family, whether you're leading a company, whether you're leading, for me, the Psychologies team, and we're like, whoa, help! I don't know what to do, because we're dealing with our own stuff, we're our own worries, and we're also dealing with the team's worry or our company's worries. So how can we show up as leaders in this current pandemic? How do we do that?
Okay, well, great question. And first of all, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
So lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. So I love I'd like to share, first of all, this beautiful quote that came out by Ken Blanchard a while back. And he basically says that, you can show up as a leader, as a parent, as a spouse, as a friend, or as a citizen. And I think that's a wonderful place to start. We're all demonstrating leadership as we're organizing ourselves, our families, our organizations, companies into lockdown as part of the response to the global pandemic. We've all taken on new and multiple roles. Most of us have a role of individual and oftentimes parent, but we're adding to that, a teacher, caregiver, emotional supporter, cook, cleaner, PR, etc. And all of this requires leadership skills that we're using. And then the very process of managing that is also about leadership. And I would also add that our children are demonstrating leadership in amazing ways. They too have had to transition from traditional models of schooling to living and learning from home almost overnight, which demonstrates incredible adaptability. They're also taking on multiple new roles in addition to being, child and student, teacher, childminder, sports coach, lunch warden, you name it. So all of this is really about leadership. And I think that, when we think about...
Can I ask about how are we defining leadership? How do you define leadership?
Well, I was just going, great. I was just going to mention that if we think about leadership as positively influencing others towards some sort of common goal or objective, then, as a very basic definition of leadership, then we can see that not only do we all have opportunities to lead, but we are actually all leading.
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic way to do it. So it's so, as you say, in all of these areas, from our children to our families, and even in a relationship, it's about, bringing people together, finding the motivation, which again, in families right now, where we're kind of with our families and trying to get people to do things perhaps that they've never done before.
Absolutely.
It's a whole new world, So what can we do? How do we start developing this leadership if we've never kind of maybe called it that before? Or how do we begin? Are there any steps to it? Are there any good strategies that you can help us with?
Great question. So I think, first of all, that there's many things that we can and are doing to lead already, and it's important to celebrate that in all of us. And I think that, I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about leadership and resilience, particularly given how important resilience is during times of crisis. We know that leaders need to be able to reassure, encourage, and support, whether it's family, friends, companies, even nations. And so that's all about building resilience. And that often involves leaders needing to be able to tap into the hope and trust and optimism to try and create some momentum and enthusiasm for the future. And so some of the ways that we can lead for that are things like, celebrating successes and focusing on the positive, helping, connection. So, for example, if we think about celebrating successes and focusing on the positive, we all know that sharing, positive stories and maybe even humor are really good at creating
Yes.
uplifting moments.
Yes. 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 Yes, I
And
mean, I think the whole thing about humor and positivity are massive, and I think are huge in terms of the way we're managing this crisis in terms of things. So I think that's fantastic concepts.
absolutely.
But what happens when either whether it's our teenage children or whether it's our team? I mean, because there's so much uncertainty, we don't know when they're going to go back to school. We don't know if we're going to have jobs at the end of this. And when that overcomes us personally, how do we pull ourselves back from that kind of, for me, kind of self-pity party or whatever, and then sort of start to bring ourselves back up into leadership again?
Well, again, I think that most of us, I think most of us have some experience living that particular experience, as you mentioned, particularly during the crisis. And so, is there a magic bullet? I don't think so. I think that there's things we can do, like trying to bring intention to focus on something, to focus on what's going well versus what's not going well. And, helping, we also know helping is very important. And not only helping, but maybe facilitating opportunities for others to help. So doing something to contribute can often be very useful in building our resilience so that we can move from, as you say, maybe that pity party to getting back to that place where we can show up as our best selves and lead. Also, what we're doing right now by connecting, we know that connection and community during times of crisis are even more important to people's sense of security. And so by actually actively being connected and reaching out and making connections, that is also a mechanism that we can help ourselves to create resilience, to build our own resilience, but it's also a way to lead for resilience by encouraging that in our families, individually, and also in our organizations.
Yeah, sure. And so again, define resilience for me. What do you mean by that? And how can we? I mean, you're talking about connectivity, all of those things, but in terms of any personal work that we can do. So for me, I can be very grumpy when I first wake up, or very despairing when I first break up. And so, I do my usual things of meditating and then journaling and getting myself into a space, reading. Sometimes when I can't get there, I will read some of my inspiring books. And it immediately shifts my perspective, and it really, really helps me. So what are the things that we can do on our own personal development, but as a parent, as a coach, as a leader of a team, or an MD, or a CEO, to help us with that kind of resilience, our own kind of fears and desperation that we have to deal with?
Well, I'll just give you a few examples. So, for example, as an employer, you can certainly think about, as an employer, you can focus on celebrating successes. So what, for example, has your organization or your company been doing right or well during the crisis? And choose, for example, to communicate a story around that. As a parent, for example, there's there's many different stories we're hearing from parents, from how they managed to successfully keep their toddler out of a Zoom meeting to how they managed to do an amazing learning experience with their child in the garden. So not only bringing some intention, focusing on the positive and sharing that, which is actually starting to spread some contagion, positive contagion, which is great, but we're also contributing by sharing some lessons and tips and tools. And I think it's also important to think about, individually, what can we do? Some people are living this by themselves, literally by themselves. And so for them, that adds another layer of complexity. So maybe thinking about, what's been my funniest lockdown moment, or what's been my best entertainment strategy during the lockdown. Similarly with helping, there's volunteer opportunities. And then there's also many different examples of people, organizations, companies, etc., helping, that also helps to create some overall positivity, and it gives us an opportunity to contribute. And speaking to the connection, we've seen, certainly we're living this connection experience right now, but we have seen an absolute explosion of Zoom and Facebook live events, everything from Zoom weddings to bar mitzvahs, etc. But if connection is something, for example, that somebody might be craving, particularly, I have many single friends who are living this by themselves, and for them, connection is maybe more important than doing, another activity. So I think it really depends on where you are, but there are certainly many things to do, from focusing on the positive, helping, connecting. Of course, we've already heard the schedules, etc., having a daily schedule.
Sure. I think that there's that piece there, isn't there, around, I think for people who, because other people can have quite a major effect on our mood. And I think sometimes if you're living on your own, you can control more what's coming in, about what you're focusing on, and what you're consuming in terms of media, or what you're reading. I think maybe it's a little bit harder when you're in a kind of a team, or a family where there's perhaps negativity, or I've got a 70-year-old teenager in my environment, so helping to manage his mood, all of those things can be challenging. Okay, so how do we replenish our reserves? You talk about leadership reserves. What is our leadership reserve? What does that look like?
Well, I think those are all the resources that we have in our being to show up in our various different roles. So that's, intellectual, spiritual, physical, all the different resources that we have. And so this is when I talk about replenishment, it's really about self-care. It's really about putting your oxygen mask on first before you're helping others. And what we do know is that leaders are not as good at practicing self-care at times. And so sometimes, it becomes even more important. And as we all are leading and we have expanded roles, arguably, we really do need to pay attention to how we're replenishing ourselves. So, I know we touched on this a couple minutes ago, but what came up, as what's been consistently coming up in my practice, is leaders looking for replenishment activities that can be done very, very quickly, because they're already task rich and time poor. So they don't want to have some sort of self-care activity that's going to require a lot of time. So I have a few strategies that I thought I would share with you.
Great, thank you.
Ones that people have reported back they enjoy. So the first one is really simple. I want to start off by saying that all of these can be done in under a minute. What's going to take longer is my explanation, but each of these can be done in under a minute.
Okay,
so the
great.
First one is around celebrating your superpowers at the end of each day. And so basically at the end of the day, once you've turned your computer off and you're ready to leave work for the day, what you're going to do is you're going to grab a Post-it note and you're going to think about, what is the superpower that I'm most proud of using today? So what's the superpower I'm most proud of using today? Is it the patience I demonstrated with my spouse? Is it the patience I demonstrated to my toddler? Was it that innovation and in doing that homework with my child? What was it? And you're going to write it down, stick it on your computer, and when you get up the next morning, the first thing that you're going to see is a reminder of one of your superpowers. And you can repeat that. There's no reason to stop. So that's something that can be done very quickly, and it reminds you of what you're doing well. Another tip I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Okay, another one, and I bring this one up because this has come up a lot in my work. It's about practicing acceptance versus comparison. We've all heard the very insightful Theodore Roosevelt quote, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And given how much we need to and want to connect at this moment in time, the flip side can be when we go to certain sites and we appear to see others doing it all and doing it perfectly. So that, I think, as many of us can attest, myself included, can certainly bring up feelings of doubt or inadequacy. So one of the things that you can do to try and check that is, first of all, identify which site it is that might be bringing that up for you, specifically what site. I take a break, make a commitment. If you can do a day, that's great. If that feels like too much, you go back to a half a day or an hour. And then when you go to the site, you want to go with a new mantra. So we know that comparison is the thief of joy. So for example, my mantra is acceptance is the bearer of joy. And so when you show up, you have something positive to remind you that you're perfectly good enough where you are.
Yeah, it's a great one. Acceptance. We were talking about that this morning as well with Roz Savage, who is the across the Atlantic rower, and she was saying with this idea of that we have to be positive all the time and rah 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 and we're getting it right. And I think for me it's being able to admit, some days I'm okay, some days I'm really good, and other days I feel absolutely rotten and really grumpy and not good. So, and I think it's once I could accept that and admit it, everything just became a whole lot easier. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
Great.
So this is great. So what I'm hearing you say, I mean, what I'm loving you saying is that we're all leaders, and at some point we're stepping into, as you say, everyday leadership, whether it's with our families, whether it's our team, whether it's our friends, and how can we lead that? I think that's great, and I think I'm taking away that kind of idea of giving back to others can really help. And for me as well, this acceptance piece is quite huge for me. It's really, really great. So one last piece of wisdom before you go for us. So we're all going to step up into leadership. We're all going to be focusing on what we are doing well rather than not. So what's one last thing that we can focus on before you go?
Okay, I would say let's all practice doing no. And that's an extension of learning how to say no to actually learning how to do no. So if you can, given how much we all have on our plates right now, why don't you think about what's one thing you can choose not to do today and not feel guilty about? There's no reason to feel guilty.
I love that.
What's one thing I'm not going to do today?
Yeah.
And I would, if you need to, put it on a Post-it note, crumple it up, throw it out, or rip it up. Some of my clients report loving ripping it up, and don't do it.
Yeah, great. That is a fantastic tip. That's wonderful. This is the lovely Palena Neale that we've had with us today, a top leadership coach from the UN, among many others, talking to us about everyday leadership and how we can lead in our own lives. Thank you so much for joining us today. Lovely to see you and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Susie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.